Chapter 3, Frescoes from the Past.
Apparently the river was ready for business now, but no, the distribution of a population along its bank was as calm and deliberate and time-devouring a process as the discovery and exploration had been. 70 years elapsed after the exploration before the river's borders had a white population worth considering, and nearly 50 more before the river had a commerce. Between La Salle's opening of the river and the time when it may be said to have become the vehicle of anything like a regular and active commerce, 7 sovereigns had occupied the throne of England. America had become an independent nation. Louis XIV and Louis XV had rotted and died. The French monarchy had gone down in the red tempest of the Revolution, and Napoleon was a name that was beginning to be talked about. Truly, there were snails in those days. The river's earliest commerce was in great barges, keelboats, broadhorns. They floated and sailed from the upper rivers to New Orleans, chained cargoes there, and were tediously warped and pulled back by hand. A voyage down and back sometimes occupied 9 months. In time, this commerce increased until it gave employment to hordes of rough and hardy men, rude, uneducated, brave, suffering terrific hardships with sailor-like stoicism, heavy drinkers, coarse frolickers, and moral styes like the Natchez under the hill of that day, heavy fighters, reckless fellows every one, elephantinely jolly, foul-witted, profane, prodigal of their money, bankrupt at the end of the trip, fond of barbaric finery, prodigious braggarts. Yet in the main, honest, trustworthy, faithful to promises and duty, and often picturesquely magnanimous. By and by, the steamboat intruded. Then for 15 or 20 years, these men continued to run their keelboats downstream, and the steamers did all the upstream business, the keelboatmen selling their boats in New Orleans and returning home as deck passengers in the steamers. But after a while, the steamboats so increased in number and in speed that they were able to absorb the entire commerce. And then keelboating died a permanent death. The keelboatman became a deckhand or a mate or a pilot on the steamer. And when steamer berths were not open to him, he took a berth on a Pittsburgh coal flat or on a pine raft constructed in the forest up towards the sources of the Mississippi. In the heyday of the steamboating prosperity, the river from end to end was flaked with coal fleets and timber rafts, all managed by hand and employing hosts of the rough characters whom I've been trying to describe. I remember the annual processions of mighty rafts that used to glide by Hannibal when I was a boy, an acre or so of white, sweet-smelling boards in each raft, a crew of 24 men or more, 3 or 4 wigwams scattered about the raft's vast level space for storm quarters. And I remember the rude ways and the tremendous talk of the big crews, the ex-keelboatmen and their admiringly patterning successors. For we used to swim out a quarter or a third of a mile and get on these rafts and have a ride. By way of illustrating keelboat talk and manners in that now departed and hardly remembered raft life, I will throw in this place a chapter from a book which I've been working at by fits and starts during the last 5 or 6 years and may possibly finish in the course of 5 or 6 more. The book is a story which details some passages in the life of an ignorant village boy, Huck Finn, son of the town drunkard of my time out west there. He has run away from his persecuting father and from a persecuting good widow who wishes to make a nice, truth-telling, respectable boy of him. And with him a slave of the widow's has also escaped. They have found a fragment of a lumber raft. It is high water in dead summertime, and are floating down the river by night and hiding in the willows by day, bound for Cairo, whence the Negro will seek freedom in the heart of the free states. But in a fog, they pass Cairo without knowing it. By and by, they begin to suspect the truth, and Huck Finn is persuaded to end the dismal suspense by swimming down to a huge raft which they've seen in the distance ahead of them, creeping aboard under cover of darkness, and gathering the needed information by eavesdropping. But you know, a young person can't wait very well when he's impatient to find a thing out. We talked it over, and by Jim said it was such a black night now that it wouldn't be no risk to swim down to the big raft and crawl aboard and listen. They would talk about Cairo because they would be calculating to go ashore there for a spree, maybe. Or anyway, they would send boats ashore to buy whiskey or fresh meat or something. Jim had a wonderful level head for a nigger. He could almost always start a good plan when you wanted one. I stood up, shook my rags off, and jumped into the river and struck out for the raft's light. By and by, when I got down nearly to her, I eased up and went slow and cautious. But everything was all right, nobody at the sweeps. So I swum down along the raft till I was almost abreast the campfire in the middle. Then I crawled aboard and inched along and got in amongst some bundles of shingles on the weather side of the fire. There was 13 men there. They was the watch on deck, of course, and a mighty rough-looking lot, too. They had a jug and tin cups, and they kept the jug moving. One man was singing, roaring, you may say, and it wasn't a nice song for parlor, anyway. He roared through his nose and strung out the last word of every line very long. And when he was done, they all fetched a kind of Injun war whoop, and then another was sung. It begun, "There was a woman in our town did dwelled. She loved her husband dearly, but another man twice as well. Singing tooraloo, raloo, 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 tooraloo, relay. She loved her husband dearly, but another man twice as well." And so on, 14 verses. It was kind of poor, and he was going to start on the next verse. One of them said it was the tune the old cow died on. Another one said, "Oh, give us a rest." Another one told him to take a walk, and they made fun of him till he got mad and jumped up and began to cuss the crowd, and said he could lame any thief in the lot. They was all about to make a break for him, but the biggest man there jumped up and says, "Set where you are, gentlemen, leave him to me, he's my meat." Then he jumped up in the air 3 times and cracked his heels together every time. He flung off a buckskin coat that was all hung with fringes and says, "You lay thar till the chawn-up's done," and flung down his hat, which was all over ribbons, and says, "You lay there till his sufferin' is over." Then he jumped up in the air and cracked his heels together again and shouted out, "Woo whoop!" And the old original iron-jawed, brass-mounted, copper-bellied corpse-maker from the wilds of Arkansas. Look at me. I'm the man they call Sudden Death and General Desolation. Sired by a hurricane, damned by an earthquake, half-brother to the cholera, nearly related to the smallpox on my mother's side. Look at me. I take 19 alligators and a barrel of whiskey for breakfast when I'm in robust health, and a bushel of rattlesnakes and a dead body when I'm ailing. I split the everlasting rocks with my glance, and I squench the thunder when I speak. Woo whoop! Stand back and give me room according to my strength. Blood's my natural drink, and the wails of the dying is music to my ear. Cast your eyes on me, gentlemen, and lay low and hold your breath, for I'm about to turn myself loose. All the time he was getting this off, he was shaking his head and looking fierce, and kind of swelling around in a little circle, tucking up his wristbands, now and then straightening up and beating his breast with his fist saying, "Look at me, gentlemen." When he got through, he jumped up and cracked his heels together 3 times and let off a roaring whoop. "I'm the bloodiest son of a wildcat that lives." Then the man that had started the row tilted his old slouch hat down over his right eye. Then he bent, stooping forward with his back sagged and the south end sticking out far, and his fists a-shoving out and drawing in front of him, and so went around in a little circle about 3 times, swelling himself up and breathing hard. Then he straightened and jumped up, cracked his heels together 3 times before he lit again. That made them cheer. And he begun to shout like this: "Woo-whoop! Bow your neck and spread, for the kingdom of sorrow's a-comin'. Hold me down to earth, for I feel my powers a-workin'. Woo-whoop! I'm a child of sin, don't let me get a start. Smoke glass, here for all, don't tempt to look at me with the naked eye, gentlemen. When I'm playful, I use the meridians of longitude and parallels of latitude for a seine and drag the Atlantic Ocean for whales. I scratch my head with the lightning and purr myself to sleep with the thunder. When I'm cold, I bile the Gulf of Mexico and bathe in it. When I'm hot, I fan myself with an equinoctial storm. When I'm thirsty, I reach up and suck a cloud dry like a sponge. When I range the earth hungry, famine follows in my tracks. Woo-whoop! Bow your head and spread. I put my hand on the sun's face and make it night in the earth. I bite a piece out of the moon and hurry the seasons. I shake myself and crumble the mountains. Contemplate me through leather, don't use the naked eye. I'm the man with a petrified heart and biler iron bowels. The massacre of isolated communities is the pastime of my idle moments. The destruction of nationalities the serious business of my life. The boundless vastness of the great American desert is my enclosed property, and I bury my dead on my own premises. He jumped up and cracked his heels together 3 times before he lit. They cheered him again, and as he come down, he shouted out, "Woo-whoop! Bow your head and spread, for the pet Child of Calamity's a-comin'." Then the other one went to swelling around and blowing again. The first one, the one they called Bob. Next, the Child of Calamity chipped in again, bigger than ever. Then they both got at it at the same time, swelling round and round each other, punching their fists mostly into each other's faces and whooping and jawing like Injuns. Then Bob called the child names, and the child called him names back again. Next, Bob called him a heap rougher names, and the child come back at him with the very worst kind of language. Next, Bob knocked child's hat off, and child picked it up and kicked Bob's ribbony hat about 6 foot. Bob went and got it and said never mind, this weren't going to be the last of this thing, because he was a man that never forgot and never forgive, and so the child better look out, for there was a time a-comin', just as sure he was a living man, that he would have to answer to him with the best blood in his body. The child said no man was willinger than he was for that time to come, and he would give Bob fair warning now never to cross his path again, for he could never rest till he had waded in his blood, for such was his nature, though he was sparing him now on account of his family, if he'd had one. Both of them was edging away in different directions, growling and shaking their heads and going on about what they was going to do. But a little black-whiskered chap skipped up and says, "Come back here, you couple chicken-livered cowards, and I'll thrash the 2 of you yet." And he done it, too. He snatched them, he jerked them this way and that, he booted them around, he knocked them sprawling faster than they could get up. Why, there weren't 2 minutes till they begged like dogs, and how the other lot did yell and laugh and clap their hands all the way through and shout, "Sail in, corpse maker! Hi, at him again, Child of Calamity! Bully for you, little Davy!" Well, it was a perfect powwow for a while. Bob and the child had red noses and black eyes when they got through. Little Davy made them own up that they were sneaks and cowards, not fit to eat with a dog or drink with a nigger. Then Bob and Child shook hands with each other, very solemn, and said they'd always respected each other and was willing to let bygones be bygones. So then they washed their faces in the river, and just then there was a loud order to stand by for a crossing. Some of them went forward to man the sweeps there, and the rest went aft to handle the after sweeps. I laid still and waited for 15 minutes and had a smoke out of a pipe that one of them left in reach. Then the crossing was finished, and they stumped back and had a drink around and went to talking and singing again. Next they got out an old fiddle, and one played and another patted juba, and the rest turned themselves loose on a regular old-fashioned keelboat breakdown. They couldn't keep that up very long without getting winded, so by and by they settled around the jug again. They sung Jolly, Jolly Raftsman's the Life for Me with a musing chorus. Then they got to talking about the differences between hogs and the different kinds of habits, and next about women and their different ways, and the next about the best ways to put out houses that was afire, and next about what ought to be done with the engines, and next about what a king had to do and how much he got, and next about how to make cats fight, and next what to do about when a man has fits, and next about differences betwixt clear water rivers and muddy water ones. The men they call Ed said the muddy Mississippi water was wholesomer to drink than the clear water of the Ohio. He said if you let a pint of this yaller Mississippi water settle, you'd have about half to 3/4 of an inch of mud in the bottom, according to the stage of the river, and then it weren't no better than Ohio water. What you wanted to do was to keep it stirred up, and when the river was low, keep mud on hand to put in and thicken the water up the way it ought to be. The Child of Calamity said that was so. He said there was nutritiousness in the mud, and the man that drunk Mississippi water could grow corn in his stomach if he wanted to. He says, you look at the graveyards, that tells the tale. Trees won't grow worth chucks in a Cincinnati graveyard, but in a St. Louis graveyard they grow upwards of 800 feet high. It's all on account of the water the people drunk before they laid up. A Cincinnati corpse don't richen the soil any. And they talked about how Ohio water didn't like to mix with Mississippi water. Ed said if you take the Mississippi on a rise when the Ohio is low, you'll find a wide band of clear water all the way down the east side of the Mississippi for 100 miles or more. And the minute you get a 1/4 mile from shore and past the line, it's all thick and yaller the rest of the way across. Then they talked about how to keep tobacco from getting moldy and from what went into ghosts, and told about a lot of other folks had seen. But Ed says, why don't you tell something that you've seen yourselves? Now let me have a say. 5 years ago, I was on a raft as big as this, and right along here it was a bright, moonshiny night, and I was on watch, and the boss of the starboard oar forward, and one of my pards, was a man named Dick Allbright, and he come along to where I was sitting forward, gaping and stretching he was, and stooped down on the edge of the raft and washed his face in the river, and come and sit down by me and got out his pipe, and had just got it filled when he looks up and says, well, looky here, he says, ain't that Buck Miller's place over yonder in the bend? Yes, says I. It is. Why? He laid his pipe down and leant his head on his hand and says, I thought we'd be further down. I says, I thought it too when I went off watch. We was standing 6 hours on and 6 off, but the boys told me, I says, that the raft didn't seem to hardly move for the last hour. Says I, though she's slipping along all right now, says I. He give a kind of groan and says, I see the raft act so before along here. "'Pears to me the current has most quit above the head of this bend during the last 2 years," he says. Well, he raised up 2 or 3 times and looked way off and around on the water. That started me at it, too. A body is always doing what he sees somebody else doing, though there may not be any sense in it. Pretty soon I see a black something floating on the water way off to starboard and quartering behind us. I see he was looking at it, too. I says, "What's that?" He says, sort of pittish. "'Tain't nothing but an old empty barrel." "An empty barrel," says I. "Why," says I, "a spyglass is a fool to your eyes. How can you tell it's an empty barrel?" He says, "I don't know. I reckon it ain't a barrel, but I thought it might be," says he. "Yes," I said, "so it might be, and it might be anything else, too. A body can't tell nothing about it such a distance as that," I says. We hadn't nothing else to do, so we kept on watching it. By and by I says, "Well, looky here, Dick Allbright, that thing's a-gaining on us, I believe." He never said nothing. The thing gained and gained, and I judged it must be a dog that was about tired out. Well, we swung down into the crossing, and the thing floated across the bright streak of the moonshine, and by George, it was a barrel. Says I, "Dick Allbright, what made you think that thing was a barrel when we was half a mile off?" says I. Says he, "I don't know." Says I, "You tell me, Dick Allbright." He says, "Well, I knowed it was a barrel. I've seen it before. Lots has seen it. They says it's a haunted barrel." I called the rest of the watch, and they come and stood there, and I told them what Dick had said. It floated right along abreast now and didn't gain any more. It was about 20 foot off. Some was for having it aboard, but the rest didn't want to. Dick Allbright said rafts that had fooled with it had bad luck by it. The captain of the watch said he didn't believe in it. He said he'd reckoned the barrel gained on us because it was in a little better current than what we was, and he said it would leave by and by. So then we went to talking about other things, and we had a song and then a breakdown. And after that the captain of the watch called for another song. But it was clouding up now, and the barrel stuck right there in the same place, and the song didn't seem to have much warm-up to it somehow. So they didn't finish it, and there weren't any cheers, but it sort of dropped flat, and nobody said anything for a minute. Then everybody got to talk at once, and one chap got off a joke, but it weren't no use. They didn't laugh. And even the chap that made the joke didn't laugh at it, which ain't usual. We all just settled down glum and watched the barrel with uneasy and uncomfortable. Well, sir, it shut down black and still, and then the wind began to moan around, and next the lightning began to play and the thunder to grumble. Pretty soon there was a regular storm, and in the middle of it, a man that was running aft stumbled and fell and sprained his ankle so that he would lay up. This made the boys shake their heads, and every time the lightning come, there was that barrel with the blue lights winking around it. We was always on the lookout for it. But by and by, towards dawn, she was gone. When the day come, we couldn't see her anywhere, and we weren't sorry neither. But next night, about 9:30, when there was songs and hijinks going on, here she comes again and took her old roost on the starboard side. There weren't no more hijinks. Everybody got solemn. Nobody talked. You couldn't get anybody to do anything but sit around moody and look at that barrel. It begun to cloud up again, and when the watch changed, the off-watch stayed up instead of turning in. The storm ripped and roared around all night, and in the middle of it another man tripped and sprained his ankle and had to knock off. The barrel left towards day, and nobody see it go. Everybody was sober and down in the mouth all day. I don't mean the kind of sober that comes of leaving liquor alone, not that. They was quiet, but they all drunk more than usual, not together, but each man sidled off and took it private by himself. After dark, the off-watch didn't turn in. Nobody sung, nobody talked. The boys didn't scatter around, neither. They sort of huddled together forward. And for 2 hours they sit there, perfectly still, looking steady in the one direction and heaving a sigh once in a while. And then, here comes the barrel again. She took up her old place. She stayed there all night. Nobody turned in. The storm come in again after midnight. It got awful dark. The rain poured down, hail too. Thunder boomed and roared and bellowed. The wind blowed like a hurricane, and the lightning spread over everything in big sheets of glare and showed the whole raft as plain as day. And the river lashed up white as milk as far as you could see for miles. And there was that barrel, jiggering along the same as ever. The captain ordered the watch to man the sweeps for a crossing, and nobody would go. No more sprained ankles for them, they said. They wouldn't even walk aft. Well, then, just then the sky split wide open in a crash, and the lightning killed 2 men of the after watch and crippled 2 more. Crippled them how, says you? Why, sprained their ankles. The barrel left in the dark betwixt lightnings towards dawn. Well, not a body had a bite at breakfast that morning, and after the men loafed around in 2s and 3s, they talked low together. But none of them herded with Dick Allbright. They all give him the cold shake. If he come around where any of the men was, they split up and sidled away. They wouldn't man the sweeps with him. The captain had all the skiffs hauled up on the raft alongside of his wigwam, and wouldn't let the dead men be took ashore to be planted. He didn't believe a man who got ashore would come back, and he was right. After night come, you could see pretty plain that there was going to be trouble if that barrel come again. And there was such a muttering going on, a good many wanted to kill Dick Allbright because he'd seen the barrel on other trips and had an ugly look. Some wanted to put him ashore. Some said, let's all go ashore in a pile if that barrel comes again. This kind of whispers was still going on, the men being bunched together forward watching for the barrel, when lo and behold, here she comes again. Down she comes, slow and steady, and settles into her old tracks. You could hear a pin drop. Then up comes the captain and says, boys, don't be a pack of children and fools. I don't want this barrel to be dogging us all the way to New Orleans, and you don't. Well, then, how's the best way to stop it? Burn it up, that's the way. I'm going to fetch it aboard, he says. And before anybody could say a word, in he went. He swum to it, and as he was pushing it to the raft, the men spread to one side. But the old man got it aboard and busted in the head, and there was a baby in it. Yes, sir, a stark naked baby. It was Dick Allbright's baby. He owned up and said so. Yes, he says, a-leaning over it. Yes, it's my own lamented darling, my poor lost Charles William Allbright, deceased, says he. For he could curl his tongue around the bulliest words in the language when he wanted to, and lay them before you without a gent started anywheres. Yes, he said he used to live up at the head of this bend, and one night he choked his child, which was crying, not intending to kill it, which was probably alive, and then he was scared and buried it in the barrel before his wife got home, and off he went and struck the northern trail and went to rafting. And this was the 3rd year that the barrel'd been chasing him. He said the bad luck always begun light and lasted till 4 men was killed, and then the barrel didn't come any more after that. He said if the men would stand it one more night and was going on like that, but the men had got enough, they started to jump out a boat and take him ashore and lynch him. But he grabbed the little child all of a sudden and jumped overboard with it, hugged to his breast and shedding tears, and we never see him again in this life, poor old suffering soul. Nor Charles William neither. Who was shedding tears, says Bob. Was it Allbright or the baby? Why, Allbright, of course. Didn't I tell you the baby was dead? Been dead 3 years. How could it cry? Well, never mind how it could cry. How could it keep all that time, says Davy. You answer me that. I don't know how it done it, says Ed. It done it, though. That's all I know about it. Say, what did they do with the barrel, says the Child of Calamity. Why, they hove it overboard and it sunk like a chunk of lead. Edward, did the child look like it was choked, says he. Did it have its hair parted, says another. What was the brand on that barrel, Eddie, says a fellow they called Bill. Have you got the papers on them statistics, Edmund, says Jimmy. Say, Edwin, was you one of the men that was killed by the lightning, says Davy. Him? Oh, no, he was both of 'em, says Bob. Then they all ha-ha'd and say, Edward, don't you reckon you'd better take a pill? You look bad. Don't you feel pale, says the Child of Calamity. Oh, come now, Eddie, says Jimmy. Show up. You must have kept part of that barrel to prove the thing by. Show us the bunghole, do, and we'll all believe you. Say, boys, says Bill, let's divide it up. There's 13 of us. I can swallow a 13th of the yarn if you can worry down the rest. Ed got up mad and said that they would all go someplace, which he ripped out pretty savage, and then walked off aft, cussing to himself, and they yelling and jeering at him and roaring and laughing like so you could hear them a mile. Boys, we'll split a watermelon on that, says the Child of Calamity. And he come rummage around in the dark amongst the shingle bundles where I was and put his hand on me. I was warm and soft and naked, and he says, ouch, and jumped back. Fetch a lantern or a chunk of fire, boys. There's a snake here as big as a cow. So they run there with a lantern and crowded up and looked in on me. Come out of there, you beggar, says one. Who are you, says another. What are you after? Speak up prompt or overboard you go. Snake him out, boys. Snatch him out by the heels. I began to beg and crept out amongst them trembling. They looked me over wondering, and the Child of Calamity says, a cussed thief. Lend a hand and let's heave him overboard. No, says Big Bob. Let's get out the paint pot and paint him all over sky blue, all over from head to heel, and then heave him over. Good, that's it. Go for the paint, Jimmy. When the paint come and Bob took the brush and was going to begin, and others laughing and rubbing their hands, I begun to cry, and that sort of worked on Davy, and he says, fast there, he's nothing but a cub. I'll paint the man that touches him. So I looked around on them, and some of them grumbled and growled, and Bob put down the paint, and the others didn't take it up. Come here to the fire, and let's see what you're up to, says Davy. Now sit down there and give an account of yourself. How long you been aboard here? Not over a quarter of a minute, sir, says I. How did you get dry so quick? I don't know, sir. I'm always that way mostly. Oh, you are you? What's your name? I weren't going to tell him my name. I didn't know what to say, so I just says, Charles William Allbright, sir. Then they roared, the whole crowd, and I was mighty glad I said that, because maybe laughing would get them in better humor. When they got done laughing, Davy says, it won't hardly do, Charles William. You couldn't have growed this much in 5 year, and you was a baby when you come out of the barrel, you know, and dead at that. Come now, tell a straight story, and nobody'll hurt you if you ain't up to anything wrong. What is your name? Alec Hopkins, sir. Alec James Hopkins. Well, Alec, where do you come from here? From a trading scow. She lays up the bend yonder. I was born on her. Papa's traded up and down here all his life. And he told me to swim off here because when we went by, he said he'd like to get some of you to speak to Mr. Jonas Turner in Cairo and tell him, oh, come. Yes, sir, it's all as true as the world. Pap, he says, oh, your grandmother. And they all laughed, and I tried to talk again, but they broke in on me and stopped me. Now, looky here, says Davy, you're scared, and so you talk wild. Honest, now, do you live in a scow, or is it a lie? Yes, sir, in a trading scow. She lays up at the head of the bend. But I weren't born in her. It's our first trip. Now you're talking. What did you come here for? To steal? No, sir, I didn't. It was only to get a ride on the raft. All boys does that. Well, I know that, but what did you hide for? Sometimes they drive the boys off. So they do. They might steal. Looky here. If we let you loose this time, will you try to keep out of these kind of scrapes hereafter? 'Deed I will, boss. You try me. All right, then. You ain't but a little ways from shore. Overboard with you. And don't make a fool of yourself another time this way. Blast it. Boy, some rascal's going to rawhide you till you're black and blue. I didn't wait to kiss goodbye, but went overboard and broke for shore. When Jim come along by and by, the big raft was away out of sight around the point. I swum out and got aboard and was mighty glad to see home again. Well, the boy didn't get the information he was after, but his adventures furnished the kind of glimpse of the departed raftsmen and keelboatmen which I desired to offer in this place. I now come to a phase of the Mississippi River life of the flush times of steamboating, which seems to me to warrant full examination. The marvelous science of piloting is displayed there. I believe there's been nothing like it elsewhere in the world.